I've talked about some curious things on this channel. I've talked about trams, I've talked about boats, I've talked about piers. Well, the 2-mile-long Brighton and Rottingdean Seashore Electric Railway was all three. Its vehicle ran on rails like a tram, it ran through the sea like a boat, and it stood clear of the water on legs like a pier. How did this mad device ever get built? Well, the answer lies with Magnus Volk. Magnus Volk was a Brighton boy who was fascinated by electricity. But he was no mad scientist. He was a man who set out to build something, and it worked, usually. He'd already given Brighton electric lighting, telephones, emergency warning systems, a ball that went up and down, and an electric railway. So when he proposed the Brighton and Rottingdean Seashore Electric Railway, he was taken seriously. His electric railway, the original one, opened in 1883 and was the first permanent electric railway in Britain. It was a success, despite some teething troubles. Volk wanted to extend it to Rottingdean, meeting his son's seaplane hangar along the way. Unfortunately, this would be very tricky. Getting there would require either a long viaduct under potentially unstable cliffs, or a steep climb that would be hard work for the little tramcars. So Volk decided to invent a third way, run an electric railway through the sea. Literally, through the sea. Incredibly, for such a strange idea, the Act of Parliament to build the line was passed with no opposition, and Volk had no trouble raising the money to construct it. As I said earlier, Volk had a good track record, no pun intended. It was envisioned that construction would take 3 years. Such an environment would require a very different form of railway construction. The line advertised itself as being built to a gauge of 18 feet, but in reality it was actually 2 parallel railway lines, laid to a gauge of 2 feet 8.5 inches each, the same as Volk's electric railway. I call the vehicle running on it a tram for the sake of convenience, but really it was unlike anything ever built before. The tram's official name was, appropriately, Pioneer, but it was commonly nicknamed Daddy Longlegs, for reasons that must surely be obvious. It was built by the Gloucester Railway Carriage and Wagon Company, but for the actual design, Volk turned to Richard St. George Moore. Moore had designed Brighton's Palace Pier, so if anyone knew the conditions round the coast, he did. He also designed the landing stages at either end of the line, everything that wasn't Volk's area of expertise, in other words. Power was to be supplied from an overhead, or rather, alongside wire. If Pioneer looked like a pier from the ground, for the passengers it was more like a luxury yacht. It had a refreshment booth, potted plants and carpets. At the insistence of the Board of Trade, lifebelts, lifebuoys, a lifeboat and a ship's bell were added to the design. A qualified sea captain had to be carried on board. The board also ruled that the railway couldn't run in bad weather and would have a speed limit of 8 miles per hour. No hardship in the luxurious cabin. The line opened on the 28th of November 1896. Construction had taken a little longer than planned, having been undertaken at low tides, and the Board of Trade inspection had found a number of flaws that needed correcting. This pushed the opening date back into the late autumn, not exactly high season for Brighton. Nevertheless, there was plenty of interest in this curiosity, and Pioneer was packed on every journey. But disaster was around the corner. On the night of the 4th of December, just a week after the grand opening, Brighton was hit by a terrible storm. Volk was aware that a storm was coming, but no one could have predicted the severity when it hit. The following morning, the full extent of the damage was clear to all. The Chain Pier, a pier that had been condemned in 1895 for being unsafe, had decided that now was the time to wreak its vengeance on its replacements. It was washed away in the night and smashed repeatedly into the Palace Pier, the West Pier, and the Paston Place Jetty, the terminus of the railway. The pier at the Rottingdean end was also badly damaged. Volk was heartbroken to see that Pioneer had come free from its moorings and been utterly wrecked. Even some of the concrete blocks that supported the rails had been overturned. The local press sadly observed that this was surely the end of a brave venture. Volk, however, was no quitter, and resolved to rebuild his railway bigger and better than before. Literally, the rebuilt Pioneer was 2 feet taller. In 1897 the line reopened. It was as popular as ever, and even carried the Prince of Wales in February 1898. But the trouble was that, while it was a wonderful novelty, it was pretty useless as a form of public transport. The journey was slow and the railway could be unreliable. Not only could services be cancelled due to bad weather, but Pioneer was prone to breakdowns. 1899 saw a reduction in passenger numbers now that the novelty had worn off. Improvements were proposed to reduce costs and improve reliability. A second tram car, more powerful motors, electricity taken from the town supply, rather than the railway running its own power station. But what really did for the line wasn't mechanical problems or dwindling passenger receipts. No, it was groins. Now I come to say that out loud, I should point out that I mean GROYNES groins, the things you use to stabilise a beach. Brighton had a programme of extending their groins, stop giggling at the back there, to prevent erosion of the cliffs. The waves, whose course had been altered by the rebuilt groins, began to undermine the track. Worse was to come. The railway was notified that their line lay in the path of further groin extensions. I'm going to get demonetised, aren't I? The section of track west of Black Rock was removed in February 1901. Volk and Moore remained optimistic. They would simply extend the electric railway to meet the shortened line, and indeed they received permission to do just that. Then they would divert the seashore railway to avoid the groins, either running it around them or over a viaduct. But Volk was a realist. In 1888 he had been bankrupted by the need to make improvements to his original railway. As he examined the scheme, he realised that the line was never going to be financially viable. It had already been rebuilt once, it was to be rebuilt a second time, and who could say when storms or coastal works would undo his work yet again? So the plan was abandoned. On the 23rd of June 1902, just 5.5 years after opening, Pioneer took its last run. Very little remains of this strange railway. At low tide, some of the concrete sleeper blocks are visible between the marina and Rottingdean, along with the remains of some of the poles that held the power supply. Part of the route is now covered by the electric railway. But even though so little can be seen, even though it was such a short-lived line, I don't think the Daddy Longlegs is in danger of disappearing into obscurity any time soon. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, please do leave a like and subscribe for more like this. Thanks as always to my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon. You are the Richard St. George Moore to my insane railway scheme. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.